Kia ora, and welcome to this first episode in a series of brief videos in which we will explore the essence of regulation. This first episode sets the scene for the episodes that follow. It explores the history of regulation as a means to achieve societal goals such as road safety, public health, viable and trustworthy financial institutions, and the sustainability of our natural environment. But before we take a jump into the vast history of regulation, it is important to define the term regulation. And specifically, how will I use the term throughout this series on the essence of regulation? While the concept regulation is defined differently across the social sciences, there is a broad consensus that regulation seeks to influence the behavior of individuals and collectives in order to make social interaction and transactions predictable and to reduce uncertainty by setting expectations and codifying consequences. Regulation is thus vital to many areas of society. Without regulation, the economic system would be unable to create and stabilize expectations regarding the access to scarce resources. Without regulation, the legal system would be unable to ensure that normative expectations are stabilized because people would simply not buy into a system that seemed inherently unjust. And without regulation, the political system would not be able to achieve collectively binding decisions. So in a phrase, regulation is an essential part of the social glue that keeps societies together. But coming to this understanding did not happen suddenly. Rather, it was a coming to terms with reality that played out across human civilizations for millennia. Insights from evolutionary biology, anthropology, population genetics and so on have indicated that we humans are hardwired to cooperate in social groups. To frame it differently, we humans are hardwired to regulate and we are hardwired to be regulated. But to be able to operate in large social groups beyond band-level societies, we humans had to overcome the limits of our inbuilt regulatory hardwiring to allow for the kind of social organizations that we see around us today. For a long time, there was no specific distinction between law and regulation, at least not as generally understood today. In many pre-modern societies, law and regulation were modeled on a thou shalt or else design. In other words, regulation sought to instill fear by stating the consequences of non-compliance. And indeed, the oldest codified forms of regulation that we know of follows this model. This is best illustrated by a set of laws and regulations introduced by the Babylonian king Hammurabi around 1800 BCE. For example, Hammurabi stated that if a house built by a builder collapses and kills its owner, the builder has to be put to death. Now, while such codified forms of law and regulation allowed for treating those regulated equally and consistently under the law across time and space, it fell short in preventing harm to arise in the first place by shaping desirable behavior within citizens and organizations. Targeting the right motivations to comply has arguably been one of the most challenging tasks for regulators throughout history. Fear-based systems, such as Vajia in ancient China, and systems of public corporal punishment that were popular in Europe during the Dark Ages, were eventually replaced by systems that sought to re-educate rule violators and change their behavior from within. Another major challenge for regulators throughout history has been to respond to the ever-changing consequences of ever more complex societies that have access to ever more complex technology. Particularly the Industrial Revolution and its consequences has made clear that many of today's harms and risks are too complex for the traditional thou shalt or else understanding of regulation. Rather than restoring harm after the fact, we often want to prevent harm from occurring in the first place. So, comparable to the regulation of seatbelts, the regulation for instance, mitigation and adaptation to climate change is a typical example of a model of regulation that is proactive and precautionary rather than reactive and remediating. Since the early 20th century, this has resulted in a rapid growth of economic and social regulation around the world. It has, unfortunately, also resulted in a situation where many feel that regulatory systems have themselves become a problem rather than a cure to help societies to work well. In the episodes that follow, we will explain how governments and others have begun to reform their regulatory systems. We will explore the strategies and the tools that are being used for effective and efficient regulation, and we will ask questions about what makes regulation accountable and ethical. All this to gain a better understanding of what it means to be a regulator that is ready to address the challenges of the 21st century. Namihi, and I hope to see you again soon.